Okay, welcome everybody to the Oregon Institute Occupational Health Science Seminar. And today I'm very pleased to introduce Sunny Bay. Sunny is somebody who actually I connected with a year ago. My colleague David Almeida from Penn State University said, hey, you need to meet Sunny. Sunny is new to Portland, and Sunny has some work, family, and sleep interests similar to what I had worked on very, very early in my career with David and others as part of the Work, Family, and Health network. So I connected with Sunny, and we ended up having a virtual meeting last fall. And I said, I really want you to come and be a speaker as part of our seminar series this year. So Sunny has decided not to talk about sleep because Sunny, like me, is not an expert in sleep and does not want to talk to the experts in sleep about sleep. And I completely understand that. So that is perfectly fine. Sunny is also on, she works very closely with Ariel, who was here last week. We actually didn't plan to have the back-to-back, but it's very complimentary. So Sunny is also with the Balmer Institute, and that's through the University of Oregon. And it's an institute that's here in Portland, and it is part of the Old Concordia University in Northeast Portland. She's an assistant professor, and her research broadly focuses on child and adolescent development in the context of daily, family, and school life. And she particularly is focused on mental health of children. And that was the other reason that I was very excited about her work. In addition to sleep, it was a focus on mental health, because as you know, I am a strong advocate for arguing that the workplace has a significant impact on mental health. And it's not just mental health of workers, but it's also mental health of their family members. And I take a very population mental health approach. And actually, that's what Sunny and I have been talking about, is that the context and how the broader context does have an impact on mental health. And the workplace is one of those huge, huge pieces of the broader context. And while Sunny's going to be talking about the family system and mental health outcomes of children, there are lots of implications for the occupational impacts on children mental health. So as I said, her research focuses on child and adolescent development in the context of daily, family, and school life. She's a clinical psychologist, and she was at Penn State University and is now at the University of Oregon, and she graduated from UCLA. Her translational research program relies on longitudinal observational designs and intensive repeated measurements to capture risk and resilience processes in diverse communities and inform prevention programs. Her work has been funded by the NIMH, the American Psychological Foundation, and the Society for Research on Child Development. She really focuses a lot on stress and stress prevention and the impacts of that stress on child mental health. She has a strong emphasis on daily methodologies and longitudinal interventions with the primary outcome, again, of child mental health. So I will turn it over to Sunny to present today. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie, for that introduction and for inviting me to this seminar series. I'm actually really glad that Ariel Williamson was here last week. You get your clinical psychologists back to back, who are sort of the same sphere, but different. So as Leslie mentioned, today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the work that I'm doing, some of the research that I conduct on family interactions and parent-child interactions. This is a bit of a no-duh statement, but I'm sure many workers are parents. And when they're done with work, they have to go home and put on their parenting hat. That's certainly what I do. And so that's the piece that I like to think about in my work. It's nearly irrefutable that the quality of the parent-child relationship matters for children's behavioral health and mental health outcomes. That's been published over and over again. And no matter how you look at it, that is almost always the case. So I have just a handful of studies that show how I've looked at that, and then I'll launch more into the meat of my presentation. When we're looking at daily sleep, just a little nod to the sleep researchers here, on days when adolescents reported that they got along with their parents, I found that they slept longer, in fact, by 26 minutes, and that was measured through ectopy. We see that longitudinally as well. So adolescents typically report, or it's not surprising that they would report a slight decrease in the parent-child relationship quality from like grade 6 to 12 as they're gaining more autonomy, becoming closer friends with same-age peers and whatnot. So that decrease is expected, but kiddos who are reporting less of a decrease in parent-child relationship quality are reporting less depression at age 19 and relatedly lower risk, showing lower risk of suicidal ideation. I've been asked to stay here, which is going to be really challenging. I wonder. We also see that in an intervention context, or the importance of family relationships in an intervention context. This one was an RCT for child anxiety disorders, and I found that children who early on, like before intervention even began, if their families rated themselves as being lower on family dysfunction, so higher functioning families, that they were able, these kids, long after the intervention, were able to show low levels of anxiety symptoms, whereas if families had rated themselves as highly dysfunctional, they were more likely to be what I classify as short-term responders. So kids who, even though they initially showed an intervention response, later on, about an average of 6.5 years later, actually showed symptom relapse. Yes?
I'm sorry, can you elaborate on what is meant by a delayed midterm?
Yes. Yeah, I'm happy to. So let me, I'm happy to go into this data. So this data was, as I mentioned, from an RCT for childhood anxiety disorders. And we initially have these measurements starting from baseline to week 36, with the intervention happening somewhere around week 0 to 16-ish. And then the youth were re-enrolled for an extended long-term follow-up, an average of 6.5 years later. It's not precisely 6.5 years later for every single individual because they were enrolled at different times, over the course of a grant cycle. So when they were re-enrolled, they were then again followed for 4 more years. So using all of those data points with anxiety symptoms on the y-axis here, I used latent path analysis to identify the result was 3 specific classes of individuals who had all received this gold standard RCT. They all did receive the non-placebo treatment at the end, no matter what they were initially assigned. And so the short-term responders were youth who initially showed a treatment response, shown by a decrease in anxiety symptoms in those earlier weeks, but then later on average, showed higher levels of anxiety. Durable responders were folks who, on average, did show a decent treatment response and only had moderate to low-ish levels of anxiety during that extended follow-up period. And then the delayed remitters were the ones who didn't initially seem to show an intervention response, but when we revisited them in adolescence and young adulthood, were doing quite well. And so baseline levels of family dysfunction differentiated short-term responders from delayed remitters. Those from higher functioning families showed this natural resolution of anxiety symptoms during the naturalistic or the longitudinal follow-up phase. And I apologize for not going into that. This was recently published last year in JCPP, which is a fairly big journal in my field anyway. But what I really wanted to talk to you actually about today was the daily lives of parent and youth. I think for me at least, when I read and even conduct these studies looking at parent-child relationship or family function, family dysfunction, I always wonder to myself, well, like everyone knows that being a good parent is good, right? Like that's pretty solid. But what does that really look like, especially when we consider all the things that both the child and the parent are bringing into the home? When we consider that really in a day, there's only a few hours of togetherness, and maybe even less as kids are growing older, maybe some weekend times. And when we're thinking about contexts beyond the family environment. So let's just consider a day in the life of a child. Sam in 7th grade, so about age 12, 13, wakes up at 6, goes to school, and it's not such a great day at school. They're feeling like they bombed the test, and that other kiddos, our students, are talking behind their back. Nonetheless, after their extracurricular activities, they get in the car with their parent who picks them up. They go home, maybe have dinner, and then work on homework before spending maybe a little bit too much time on their tablets and then going to sleep. We can also consider a day in the life of a caregiver who also, mom, Sarah, wakes up at 6 or maybe even before that if she has to pack lunch for younger siblings. And she goes to work, perhaps gets racist remarks from coworkers, has to put out a million fires at work. It's a busy day with high levels of demand. And then has to leave work early, even though there's a lot to do because she has a health appointment. Somehow makes it to pick up her child. It's a pretty busy day, but not a crazy out of this world kind of day. Pulls together dinner. And this could be, of course, a male caregiver as well. And then eventually makes it to bed. Right. So I really like to think about the course of the day and just reflect on stressors throughout the day that can impact how they're feeling, provoke like a reaction, a stress response, and also think through opportunities for coping and specifically dyadic or interpersonal coping, where parents and youth together can facilitate each other's recovery from these stressful events, promote a restful night of sleep, and get the body ready for yet another day out in the world. This is my sort of overarching thinking, overarching thought. I'm really interested in this idea of how events outside of the home spill into the child's experiences in the home. And likewise, we would expect the same for the caregiver as well. And this is where interactions happen that really make up what we broadly call parent-child relationship quality or family function. But there's a lot there, and it's not really just about what the parent does or does not do. We have to consider these external events that individuals are experiencing. And then also, this piece here is transactional. So a relationship quality really comes from both what the parent is bringing to the table, as well as what the child is bringing to the table, and then the back and forth transactions that take place over repeated interactions. So the studies, everything excites me, but the part that I really want to talk to you about today is this piece, and specifically what do these opportunities for protective sort of interactions look like? So this is sort of trending on social media, 5 to 9 after the 9 to 5. So I'm thinking about the 5 to 9 p.m. hours after the workday. So I'm going to take you through 2.5 studies in greater depth. The first one is a slightly older one, examining the spillover of stress in children. And I'm going to share with you what that means for parent-child interactions at the end of the day. And then I'm going to elaborate on an ongoing study on social support, specifically arising between parents and youth. And then I'll conclude with next steps. So in this first study, the big question was, how are stressors experienced outside the home by children, with the focus on children in this particular paper, expressed within the family? This was conducted earlier in my research career with mentors, Rena Rapetti and Ed Robles. And so the study had 47 families enrolled, and each family had at least one child between the ages of 8 to 13, and that was the focal child. This is a daily diary study, which you'll see come up quite a bit in my research. So children and parents completed daily surveys for 56 consecutive days. And children responded to questions related to peer problems, academic problems, warmth with parents, specifically mothers and fathers. These were heterosexual couples in this particular study, negative mood and positive mood. And we also had mother reports of parent-child warmth, parent-child conflict, and father reports of parent-child warmth and parent-child conflict as well. So the big question is, on days when, or the main question that I asked was on days when children experience more academic problems or peer problems at school, is that changing how they feel about their interactions at home? There's quite a bit of research showing this kind of stress spillover effect in working parents. And this is one of the few studies, although it's been replicated quite many times now, examining that in youth. So we have first models that look at mother-child interactions on the same day as academic problems and peer problems. And we have a child report and mother report of the interaction quality. So looking at mother-child warmth specifically, I found that on days when children experienced more academic problems, they thought their interactions with their moms were less warm. Interestingly, mothers did not report the same. And then again, conflict on days when children experienced more academic problems at school, they thought they had more conflict with mothers. Mothers, again, did not detect the same pattern. Then looking at father-child interactions, we see a similar pattern with father-child conflict. On days when adolescents or children, in this case, preteens, experienced more academic problems, they thought that they fought with their fathers more, but fathers didn't report the same. And then there's there's a hypothesis related to social withdrawal, that on a stressful day that individuals might want to withdraw from others and spend time on their own. And so I also looked at child reports of time spent together with mothers and fathers and found that on days when children experienced more academic problems, they spent less time with fathers, according to their reports, but not necessarily with mothers, likely because the interactions between mothers, who were the primary caregiver oftentimes, and the child were more prescribed and scheduled than the fathers, who were less likely to be the primary caregiver in this. The likely mediator among many is negative mood. So not surprisingly or shockingly, if the child when children experienced academic problems, they felt more upset and distressed, and that mood spilled over into the home and really colored the way that they were experiencing their interactions with mothers. These main effect associations that I shared with you in the previous slide were partially mediated by negative mood on the part of the child. I also examined whether baseline characteristics of the parent-child relationship moderated these spillover findings. I had actually expected that children who generally come from less tight-knit families would experience greater spillover, but I actually found the opposite. So on the x-axis here, we have daily levels of academic problems. On the y-axis, we have daily reports of mother-child warmth. The red line shows the average child, and we see a slightly decreasing slope where increases in academic problems is related to lower levels of warmth. And we see that slope is even declining more, I guess, in children who reported that they were generally quite close to their parents. Children who reported that they were less close to their parents actually did not demonstrate this spillover effect at all, so it didn't really matter what was going on outside of the home for these children. So all in all, we find that on days when children experience more academic problems, they're perceiving more conflict and less time spent together with their parents. And the spillover effect was more pronounced in tight-knit dynamics. So what this shows is that stressors experienced outside of the home, even if they're relatively common and not out of the ordinary, affect the ways that children experience interactions in the home. But that there are likely limited behavioral manifestations of the stress. If the child really did act in angry, sort of irritable ways, we would have expected the parent to also report that there was more conflict in the home, and we didn't really see that. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering how you define academic problems, because, an academic problem could be, getting a C on a test, or it could be, being expelled from school. I mean, there's a broad spectrum. So how did you define this in the study?
So in this study, the focus was on pretty intentionally on everyday stressors. So it was not really getting expelled from school, but more along the lines of my schoolwork was too hard, or like I felt criticized by my teacher. Well, that.
Okay, so not every day,
everyday
not
type
dramatic.
problems. Exactly.
Okay, not flunking out, not,
Right.
okay, thank you.
Yes.
So from your chart, it looks like that it's kind of specific for the academic problems.
Yeah.
Or severe problems, So does that also have something to do with, because in the tight-knit families, the child might actually be more worried because the parents expect something good?
I think so, actually. That's what we didn't see the spillover effect for peer problems, although other studies outside of my lab have found that. But I do wonder if with academic problems in particular, if you are struggling, you may be feeling scared about what your parents are going to say, or maybe you are trying to get help on your homework. And I know in my personal life, that never led to happy, fun interactions when I'm trying to get homework help from my parents. And so certainly I think that is very possible. Yeah, yes.
Since we're taking a break for questions, so you're looking at the spillover from 9 to 5, going up to 5 to 9.
Ish, yes.
I'm imagining that your data set is also, you could analyze it a different way where, for instance, the experience you have from 5 to 9 in the evening before school could affect school
Yeah.
performance the next day.
Yes, absolutely. I believe that to be true. I have not looked at that in this data. I'm trying to remember if I've looked at it elsewhere. In general, what I found is, I think theoretically that's very plausible. And I'm very interested in that idea, which is why in the next set of studies, will share with you some of my work really focusing in on the interactions that are happening after school. Empirically, I haven't actually found very strong support for next day effects, but I feel my assumption is that it really is limited by sort of our measurement limitations, that and limitations related to self-report and sort of control bias and all of that. But I certainly think it's true. I definitely believe it to be true. And for that reason, especially, I'm really interested in what is happening in the family during those hours, because I do think I know that it promotes good sleep, better, longer sleep at a minimum. And I also believe that would help set the child up better for next day stressors.
So just on that point, you think it might have an effect? I know I raised the question, but I think it may not have an effect because of the restorative effect of sleep and the improved mood that most people have in the morning. Basically, resetting things, starting again, so.
But wouldn't it promote restorative sleep? I guess.
Well, in the evening, but let's say sleep is the same every day.
Yeah.
And then you reset, so that the things that happened yesterday, you forget about. Start the
Possibly.
day fresh.
I think in mediating, this is where my interest in safe sort of comes in, although I'm, again, very, very nervous about going too far down in the direction of this crowd is, I had thought about safe as an important mediator, you know, when we're looking at actual effects from parent-child interactions the night before to how things are going at school. But we'll talk more about it. Yes.
And were you able to look at interactive effects if a child experienced both academic problems and peer problems in the same day?
I did not. I was only able to sum it. When I do sum the scores, I see similar spillover findings, but I think it's probably driven by academic problems if I were to choose one. And in fact, I initially submitted this publication with a sum score, and the reviewers wanted specificity in you know what were in the stressor measurements, which I agree with. So that's what happened here, and I think that's informative for sure. Thank you for these questions. Okay. So all that said, although there may be some disagreements conceptually, I still, well, so the takeaway here, you know, going back to my initial opening statement, is that already we see that parent-child relationship, it's not really just about what the parent is doing. And in fact, if you just ask the child, it may be quite driven by other external events that they are experiencing and other sort of moods that they're feeling. Not only that, I think this study, I like to start with the study because it really highlights this after school period as a potential sort of opportunity for coping that most certainly involves parents and the teen together. So the next two studies, which uses data from the same larger study, is getting at what the interactions should look like, could look like at the end of the day, assuming that there were some problems that the child experienced earlier in the day that can, again, promote this sense of social support that we know is so important for mental health and also actually physical health as well. So I've said this. So I'm on my last year of an R21 from NIMH, and the goal of this larger study is to characterize the mechanics of what I call supportive communication. Supportive communication, that terminology was taken from communication sciences, actually. And it's really about like what, to me, the way I think about it is that it's the conversation that leads to one feeling supported. And in whether we're looking at health outcomes or mental health outcomes, we know that high levels of perceived support is incredibly, maybe not incredibly, but it is very, very predictive of well-being. But perceived support is really just a perception, right? So what is going on in the conversations that kids and parents are having in the day-to-day that could lead the child to feel supported? This is conducted in partnership with my collaborator, Tim Brick, at Penn State, among other investigators. So I've already said many of these things, but I think the adolescent period is particularly interesting to think about because kids are increasing in their levels of autonomy, meaning that they are probably, they have more say over support. Like they can seek support, they can ask for help, and they may not want support, which is actually pretty big. So in my clinical practice, it's not uncommon to hear the teens say that they just want to be left alone. And the parents say, well, you're telling me that I'm supposed to support them. And also that I have to like foster independence, you know, how do I balance those two pieces? So this really led me to think about social support as a dyadic process. Is there a question? And specifically in this R21, I'm looking at the mechanics or the components of supportive communication, starting from youth support seeking here. So the child has to make some sort of a bid or indicate that they need support in some way or another. And then the parent ideally provides support, but it may not necessarily be in the way that the child wants it, which I think is interesting to think about. And of course, although my study doesn't quite look at this piece, the parents also have a ton of things, other sort of stressors that they're contending with outside of the home. And those experiences undoubtedly carry over into the home and shape what kind of support that they provide to their child. And then the child has to receive that support. They may, even though the parent did all the things right, but the child may find it annoying or not desire that form of support. They may not detect it, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. And in the adult couples literature, this actually has been looked at quite a bit, and we know quite a lot about mechanics of social support. Like, for example, invisible support, so support that is recognized by the support provider, but not necessarily by the recipient, has been found to be particularly helpful because it's more empowering than the alternative and concordance of support. So giving the support recipient what they're looking for is also has been found to be helpful. But surprisingly, despite the unique challenges of adolescence, we don't know a whole lot about this time period. So we've collected data from 138 parent-youth dyads. And the youth in this sample was between the ages of 12 to 15. I'm going to show this on average. The teen was 14, the parent was 43. We didn't have a whole lot of diversity in terms of parent gender. And then it was demographically, or on the youth side, they were mostly white. This was in central Pennsylvania. And these were the study procedures participants had to complete. So first they completed a Zoom interview or baseline assessment. And as a part of that, they completed single administration surveys related to like mental health, social support, among other things, stress. And then they completed what I call a 2-week-long naturalistic observational period. And the focus here was really to characterize supportive communication, stress, affect, and we used EMAs, different forms of EMAs or ecological momentary assessments. Those are just repeated surveys that are pinged on phones multiple times a day. We also used Bluetooth signals to estimate how close or far apart parents and teens were from one another. We did some fun things with that I'm not going to talk about today. And then to me, the most near and dear to my heart are these video recordings. We had parents and teens record themselves when they were just going about their daily lives in the car, like when they're running errands or getting picked up from extracurricular activities. And the goal was to really behaviorally characterize supportive communication. So I'm going to tell you about a study that's currently, or a manuscript that's in preparation using data from the baseline surveys, and then I'll tell you about some of the preliminary findings that I'm getting, or I was able to pull from the naturalistic observational period. So using the baseline data, my 2 students who are in the Masters of School Psych program at UO really dove into support seeking and support provision. Specifically, we looked at what types of support are youth seeking in general. Again, baseline questionnaires, not taking advantage of all of the naturalistic data yet. What types of support are parents providing? Is there agreement? And then how are youth support seeking, parent support provision, and support gap associated with youth depression symptoms? So this measure was one that was taken from my colleague Andy High in communication sciences. And we asked, first of all, I should say, when I say support type, there are 4 types that are measured through this measure and also in other parts of the study. There's informational, which is really about advice giving, emotional, which is comfort, reassurance. Well, reassurance actually is a little bit double-edged. Hope, confidence. Esteem support is reassurances that I'm a worthwhile person. And social presence is this idea that someone is there for you. So the youth were asked to complete the scale. It had 20 items, 5 for each subscale. And they had to, the question stem was, I seek support from my parent because I want them to, for example, give me advice about what to do or provide me with hope and confidence. Parents have to say what they actually did. So when I provide support to my child, I give them reasons why they should or should not do something. And these, the questions were completely parallel to one another. I'm just providing some different examples for variety, or telling my members. And so based on this measure, we were able to see what support type youth sought. In general, they sought out equal levels of informational, emotional, and social presence support. The average teen tended to seek out esteem support the least. And so this was statistically different from the other support types. As far as what the parents were providing, they tended to provide or report that they provided higher levels of emotional support and social presence support and lower levels of informational support and esteem support. Now, when we compare what the youth sought out based on their reports to what the parents provided, based on their reports, we found that parents and youth reported, or youth sought out as much informational support as the parents provided on average, again, but there was significant gaps in emotional support, esteem support, and social presence support. And I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. Parents are reporting that they're providing more emotional support, esteem support, and social presence support, which is pretty cool. As long as we're gonna find out whether that's helpful, hurtful, or neutral in the next one. And then with informational support, it was about you sought out as much as the parents said they provided. So let's look at whether these different forms of support seeking, support provision, and support gap are associated with youth depression. This is cross-sectional, although the dependent variable was the depression score. As far as support seeking goes, teens who reported that they wanted more informational support, so like advice and whatnot, were less depressed. Teens who said that they wanted more esteem support were actually more depressed. And I think this makes a lot of sense if you think about the coping literature, which would suggest that like problem solving, getting sort of concrete ideas on what to do about a problem, as long as it's controllable, is associated with better mental health. Esteem support could reflect someone who desires to feel more worthwhile, or maybe someone who's seeking a lot of reassurance about their self-worth, you know, which also could be associated or indicative of depression. As far as parent support goes, it really seems that emotional support is associated with lower levels of depression in the teen. And the other things, other forms of support are neutral. So, and then for support gap, too much informational support, despite it being actually a good thing when we're looking at the support seeking side of things, too much informational support relative to what the child is wanting was actually associated with more depression symptoms. So it may be, like I said, that too much of a good thing. In this case, maybe it reflects families where the parents are over-involved, perhaps. So for the sake of, I'll just quickly summarize. So on average, parents provided greater levels of emotional, esteem, and social presence support than what the youth sought out, and this wasn't a bad or a good thing. Youth who seek out more informational support are less depressed, which I think is really important to know. Because usually sort of teens, when we look at social support again, social support or support seeking in its entirety is considered to be a coping skill that's more adaptive than less adaptive. But this very simple cross-sectional analysis is already showing that there are different ways to seek or different types of support that individuals can seek, and that those types really matter, or they have different associations with mental health. However, youth whose parents provided even more informational support than what they were looking for were more depressed. But I'm constantly wondering, like, okay, so that's what these participants are saying, but what is it really looking like? How is it manifesting behaviorally? And that's where this video comes in. We're still coding the video, but on average, each family contributed about 2 hours of video footage across 2 weeks. We have a paper under review, just reporting compliance and et cetera. And we found that parents who were more depressed tended to do a little less, which makes sense because they're likely not getting out of the house much or just feeling really overburdened. So I wanted to show you a 3-minute clip of a really sweet interaction. The videos were installed in the cars looking into the car, and they were told to, it actually turned on pretty automatically and turned off when the car engine was shut down. We kept data from footage where all the people in the car had consented to be a part of this research study, and we got rid of all the data where that was not the case. So there's subtitles. The sound quality is not the best because there's car noises. Many thanks to my research assistants for trying to transcribe this data. But so we go.
Oh, no, I'm so proud of you. You are a few behind, but you only have 6, but grades are free. Let's see, I'm in grade. What'd you guys do at Benny's?
Well, first they just rubbed it in my face. They go backward. They're like, come on, Nick, come on, please try it.
Yeah, Mama likes me walking on 2 legs.
I'm just so afraid that you're not. That's what I did today.
What did you do today?
I noted their first knee flip. We jump up and run and land it. That was nice.
I heard that you might be Belmont Brown Trout.
Oh my gosh, I got that.
I'll give you some context afterwards.
The whole thing that somebody said, I don't know if I was supposed to be official, but I was only 2% says that we should change it, and that makes me mad. Only 2% can realize that it's racist. And then she's like, here, the came itself from the server, and she's like, here, let me give you a little lesson. Amazing. Are you still going on about Nate saying that he doesn't think that they should change it? And then she said, one of those the black part
Okay, so
or the yellow rice bakers. And then Betty did something behind me. I'm and then I was like, it's not.
we uninvited, she's something on the back there.
She didn't feel better though.
I honestly believe,
A brown child is an
no, I understand that. I think it is time that they do need to change the mascot. But brown trout, does you be worse than the Belmont brown trout?
Or we could just be annoying cheerleaders and something and be like, you can't watch us out. No, but that's a really cool name would be the Black Bears.
Belmont black bears would be fantastic.
Oh my gosh. Oh, it was like, do you think we should change the mascot? No. And no, it was like, do you like the Red Bears? Yes. It's like, what? You like the brown trout? And it was like, yes, no, other. I said other. A brown trout is another word for, another for unflushed piece of poop.
I'll just pause here. It's lovely, actually. I forgot to give you context. The school district was voting on a new mascot name because it was offensive to Native Americans and Indigenous people, but surprisingly, there was a lot of pushback. I had attended actually some of those school board meetings. And so the child is telling his mom about a moment during the day when he felt he didn't quite know what the survey was about and maybe inadvertently made a choice that could be perceived as racist. And so this is an interaction that's really full of what I would characterize as supportive communication. In my data, we see the mom telling him like, great job, you know, initially starting with a lot of praise, providing support when the child was talking about not landing a backflip or landing a backflip, but getting made fun of. And then this episode here at the end. So we started to look at the data. Coding is underway, but I've taken a peek at the first 3 pilot families. And first, for these 3 families at least, there were about 93 to 158 minutes of video recordings. We had to cap it at 250 because some families would have the videos just running over weekend trips and whatnot. And across these recordings, we found 12 episodes of supportive communication in dyad 1, 13, and then 27 in the 3rd dyad. They were really talkative. And then what we're doing now is characterizing different types of support-seeking behaviors that align with the support types that I introduced earlier today, and then some more. So telling, which is where we're just describing a negative event that happened, complaining about something that happened that upset you, happens in almost every supportive communication episode. 100%, 100%, and 96%. Another way that a child could signal the need for support is by sharing a negative emotion that they're currently experiencing or one in the past, like, oh, I was so mad today. And that's pretty variable, 66%, 38%, and 56%. Support request, which is where the child is actually making a request for support, is really infrequent. And I think to me, this is really interesting because the public health messaging, you know, around issues of mental health is if you're suffering or if you're having some problems, talk to someone. And kids are not talking to someone in the way that you would sort of expect a public health campaign to portray. The parents are doing all the things. So they're providing informational support. So sort of like advice giving or seeking more information for additional clarity, almost 100% of the time, or it's certainly the most common. Emotional support is quite variable, 7.7% to 58% in these pilot families. Esteem support is also infrequent. And then tangible support, which is sometimes called instrumental support, where you're like actually offering help for something, is also uncommon. But that might be because they're in the car literally, so like there isn't so much you can physically do for somebody. But this is really exciting. We have about 30 families coded. We have about way more to code. And so as far as next steps go, we're continuing to code supportive communication. And we're also going to look at supportive communication reported on the EMAs. We're asking a lot of the same questions. And we have a couple of papers that we're working on that uses different sorts of approaches like natural language processing, machine learning, and deep learning, not done by me, but a collaborator, to improve the identification of supportive communication behaviors and also the characterization of depression in youth. And then just thinking broadly, I've been really interested in considering culture and community and the role of those contexts in this model. And in my other line of research, I study suicide prevention and suicide risk. So connecting these processes to suicide risk is another sort of way that my research is going. So thank you. I think we have about 9 minutes for questions. Thank you.
Justin?
Yes.
So, sorry.
I just wanted to check with Justin, to see if there's questions.
Oh, question in chats and then.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
So, you are taking our kids to be making diaries. The earliest, the youngest age was 8.
Yes.
how independently could an 8-year-old create a diary about kind of
Yeah.
questions? And then would you imagine that there are answers that, let's say, they're going to get some help from either another sibling or from one of the parents?
Yeah.
Would that potentially influence that? Well, when you get up into 14, 15-year-olds, there's probably a bit more independence attitude would be associated with this older kids. But I would think 8-year-olds might be a little bit on the intimidating side for filling out times.
Yeah, I'll just,
Questionnaire was 37 items.
I'm sorry?
The questionnaire had 37 items in the, so I have the same question as you.
yes.
Yeah.
So, just to clarify, the word diaries, even though that's used in the field, is a little bit misleading. They're just closed-ended surveys. Questions, Likert scales, checklists and whatnot, and that is always the concern. 8 is the lowest I would go because I have conducted these types of surveys in an elementary school, and 7-year-olds did not get it. It was really rough, their responses. Actually, 3rd graders could understand the questions, and of course, we're using developmentally sort of appropriate scales whenever possible. There is always the concern that parents are over helping. That was a greater concern earlier on. So in the 8-year-old study, most families use the family computer to log on to their own portals. So it would be pretty easy for a parent to cheat and fill out the items. Nowadays, most people have personal devices, and at least in the 12-year-old study, we were able to loan personal devices just for the sake of the study if the youth didn't have one. So that helps improve our feelings, but certainly that's a concern. Compliance is generally better when the parent and the youth are working on the study together, and like when they're participating together, not working on the survey together, because parents do remind the kids to fill out the surveys. So.
This time log, I mean, obviously you have the survey being filled out. Are some of these like, let's reflect back on the week versus every single day you end up taking, where you have time log as to when they actually answer the questions versus reflecting back on, it's Saturday morning, let's think back on the week.
Oh, yeah.
Any feeling about how routinely and regularly they're filling out?
Yeah, the time logs are actually, it's a very specific measurement when we're thinking about compliance. So I actually would not retain data if it wasn't completed within the 24 hours that they were supposed to. And I've thrown it out of some other data sets because it's very messy, as you can imagine. In the 8 to 13-year-old study, that was, the post-op was magical. We got actually like above 95% compliance rates. And that was with a strict criteria that the survey had to be done by 8 a.m. the morning after it was technically due. I have not been able to get those that high of a compliance rate in subsequent studies. It's more like 75, 85%-ish, which I think is pretty standard in the field. Yes.
So are there any questions from,
Understood.
okay, all right.
So this is a really broad question. There's a lot of chatter in my generation who have raised children that when we were growing up, parents were much more absent, right? It was like, watch TV, play outside, come home when it's dark. You know, I mean, like really, it's this whole, you can go online and people are romanticizing the 70s and 80s, that parents weren't so hands-on, helicopter parents, right? So something has changed in the culture. I think this idea of the expectation of what parents are supposed to provide to children. And then I think what's very interesting in your research to me is that when they provide too much information, which I would interpret as prescriptive and controlling potentially, the children become more depressed, because the whole point is that children are trying to differentiate, you know, and they want independence. I mean, they also want love and support, but right, it's like this delicate balance. So my question is twofold. One, do you see something that has, you know, fundamentally changed in the culture regarding parental support? And also, you know, where is that point that goes from support to controlling or stifling
Mhm.
the child?
Yeah, that's a
Sorry, that
really
was
great
a lot.
question. No, and that's sort of exactly what I'm trying to assess, particularly in the social support space. I completely agree. I think couple of decades ago, the idea of parental monitoring became quite popularized as a protective factor for preventing substance use and other risk behaviors. And more recently, and this is, you're really hitting on the point that I wanted to convey as well. It's not really just about the parent and what the parent is doing. It's truly sort of this dyadic process that is shaped by external influences outside of the home. So for me, like thinking about that balance, not just as a parent, like I rarely say I'm a parenting researcher because I don't feel like it's really all about parenting, but I'm more of a family process researcher because I really perceive things like monitoring over involvement as more of a process. Actually in the parenting monitoring literature, there's nowadays a greater emphasis placed on the role that the youth has in managing information. And I actually have a couple of studies that my postdoc is working on, looking at, again, the discrepancy between what the parent thinks they know and what the youth think they're telling them. And I am really excited for that study because sort of in the same vein, I feel like that balance is what's helpful. Like understanding and characterizing that balance is what would be more helpful to people out there.
We find the same thing with supervisors and employees. There's a discrepancy. We actually, my colleague and I have termed it the perceptual gap. And understanding, I think, what that perceptual gap contributes to and what is positive is really, I mean, that's the question.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and close us and thank you very
so
much.
much.
Yeah, and very interesting presentation. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.